What would you do if you discovered that your own son chose a game with his friends instead of staying by your side in the scariest moment of your life? I'm Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, in the same small house where I raised my son David all by myself after his father passed away when David was only 7 years old. That was 22 years ago, and let me tell you, those were the hardest years of my life, but also the years that gave my life the most meaning. I was drying my hands on the kitchen towel that Tuesday morning when I heard my son David whispering on the phone in the hospital waiting room. His voice was low, but I could hear every word clearly. "Man, I'm going to be late for the game. My mom is making drama at the hospital again." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was lying on that cold examination table, shaking with fear, waiting for the doctor to tell me what was wrong with my heart, and my 25-year-old son was calling my pain drama. But let me start from the beginning, because this story didn't start that day in the hospital. It started months before, when I first began feeling those sharp pains in my chest. I remember I was folding laundry in my bedroom, the same bedroom where I spent so many sleepless nights worrying about David when he was a teenager, when suddenly I felt like someone was squeezing my heart with both hands. The pain was so intense that I had to sit down on the edge of my bed and wait for it to pass. I didn't tell David about it. I never told him about my pains, my worries, or my fears. You see, when you're a single mother, you learn to be strong for your child. You learn to hide your own needs because your child's needs always come first. I worked 2 jobs for 18 years to give David everything he needed. During the day, I worked at Miller's fabric shop downtown, and at night, I took in sewing work at home. I altered wedding dresses, fixed torn pants, and hemmed curtains until my fingers ached and my eyes burned from the strain. Every penny I earned went toward David's education, his clothes, his food, his dreams. When he wanted to play baseball in high school, I bought him the best glove I could afford, even though it meant I ate beans and rice for 2 weeks. When he wanted to go to college, I took out loans that I'm still paying off today. When he got married to Jennifer last year, I gave him the money I had been saving for my own retirement to help them buy their first house. I did all of this because I loved him more than life itself. He was my whole world, my reason for getting up every morning, my pride and joy. I thought I was raising a good man, a man who would understand the value of family, the importance of taking care of the people who love you. I thought wrong. Before we continue with this story, I want to ask you something. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself or someone you know in this story, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps me share these important stories with more people who might need to hear them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing because I share real stories about family, love, and the challenges we face as we get older. The chest pains became more frequent over the next few weeks. Sometimes they came when I was climbing the stairs to my bedroom. Sometimes they came when I was carrying groceries from the car. Sometimes they came when I was just sitting in my armchair, watching television and thinking about David and Jennifer and hoping they would visit me soon. I started keeping a small notebook where I wrote down when the pains happened and how long they lasted. I didn't want to worry anyone, but I also didn't want to ignore something that might be serious. The notebook became my secret companion, filled with dates and times and descriptions of pain that I couldn't share with anyone. One evening in March, I was making dinner for myself, just a simple chicken breast with some vegetables, when the pain in my chest became so severe that I had to grip the kitchen counter to keep from falling down. This time, the pain didn't go away after a few minutes like it usually did. This time, it stayed with me for almost an hour, making it hard to breathe, making me feel dizzy and scared. That night, lying in my bed and staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I was going to tell David about the chest pains. I was going to ask him to come with me to see a doctor. Maybe, I thought, this could be an opportunity for us to spend some time together. Maybe he would see how much I needed him, and we could become closer again. You see, ever since David got married, our relationship had changed. He used to call me 3 times a week. He used to come over for Sunday dinner. He used to ask my advice about work, about life, about everything. But after the wedding, the phone calls became shorter and less frequent. The Sunday dinners stopped happening. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, always having somewhere else to be. I understood that he had a new life now, a wife to take care of, new responsibilities. But deep in my heart, I missed my son. I missed the long conversations we used to have. I missed feeling needed and important in his life. I missed feeling like I mattered to someone. So when I called David that Thursday evening to tell him about the chest pains, my hands were shaking as I dialed his number. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, and I could hear the television in the background. "Hi, Mom, what's up?" he said, and I could tell he was only half listening to me. "David, honey, I need to talk to you about something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been having some chest pains lately, and I think I should probably see a doctor." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. "Chest pains," he said finally. "What kind of chest pains?" I told him about the sharp pains, about how they came and went, about how scared I was that something might be wrong with my heart. I told him about the notebook where I had been keeping track of everything. I told him that I didn't want to go to the doctor alone, that I would really appreciate it if he could come with me. "Of course, Mom," he said, and my heart filled with relief and joy. "Of course I'll come with you. When do you want to make an appointment?" "Maybe next week," I said. "If that works for you." "Yeah, sure," he said. "Just let me know when, and I'll be there." After I hung up the phone, I felt better than I had felt in months. My son cared about me. My son was going to be there for me when I needed him most. Maybe I had been wrong to worry that our relationship was falling apart. Maybe David was just busy with his new life. But when it really mattered, when I really needed him, he would be there for me. I spent the next few days feeling almost happy. I made an appointment with Dr. Peterson, my family doctor, for the following Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. I called David on Sunday to confirm, and he said he would pick me up at 9:30. I went to bed that Sunday night feeling grateful and hopeful. On Tuesday morning, I woke up early and took extra care getting ready. I wanted to look nice for David, to show him that I wasn't just some sick old woman, but his mother who had always taken care of herself and tried to look presentable. I put on my best blue dress, the one David had complimented years ago, and I did my hair the way he used to like it when he was younger. At 9:30, I was sitting by the window, watching for David's car. 9:30 came and went. 9:45 came and went. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. "Mom, I'm sorry, I'm running a little late," David said, and I could hear traffic noise in the background. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, okay?" "Okay, sweetheart," I said, trying not to let him hear the disappointment in my voice. "I'll call Dr. Peterson's office and let them know we're going to be a few minutes late." But 10 minutes turned into 20 minutes, and 20 minutes turned into 30 minutes. When David finally pulled up to my house at 10:20, I had already called the doctor's office twice to reschedule our appointment for 11 o'clock. I walked out to his car as quickly as I could, apologizing for making him wait, even though I had been the one waiting for almost an hour. When I got into the passenger seat, David looked frustrated and stressed. "Sorry, Mom," he said, backing out of my driveway quickly. "Jennifer needed me to help her move some furniture this morning, and it took longer than I expected." "That's okay, honey," I said, fastening my seatbelt. "I'm just grateful that you're here with me." But during the drive to Dr. Peterson's office, I noticed that David kept checking his phone at red lights. When I tried to make conversation, asking him how Jennifer was doing, how work was going, he gave me short, distracted answers. It felt like his mind was somewhere else entirely. "David," I said as we pulled into the parking lot of the medical building, "is everything okay? You seem upset about something." He turned off the engine and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was impatience mixed with annoyance, like I was bothering him with something unimportant. "I'm fine, Mom," he said. "I just had to cancel some important plans today to bring you here, that's all." Those words stung more than any chest pain I had ever felt. Important plans. More important than his mother's health? More important than being there for the woman who had sacrificed everything for him? But I didn't say anything. I just smiled and said, "Well, I really appreciate it, honey. It means the world to me that you're here." We walked into Dr. Peterson's office together, and I felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. Pride because my handsome son was walking beside me, and all the nurses would see that I had a family, that I wasn't just another lonely old woman. Anxiety because I could feel the distance between us, even though we were walking side by side. The first twist in my story happened right there in that waiting room, when I realized that the son I thought I knew, the son I thought would always be there for me, was already starting to slip away. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. In the waiting room, David sat beside me but immediately pulled out his phone and started typing messages. I tried to make conversation with him, pointing out a beautiful flower arrangement, mentioning how nice the receptionist had been, but he just nodded without really listening. "David," I said softly, "I know this is probably boring for you, but it really helps me to have you here. I've been so worried about these chest pains, and sometimes I imagine the worst possible things." He looked up from his phone for just a moment. "Mom, you're probably fine. You've always been healthy. This is probably just stress or something." Just stress? I had been having severe chest pains for weeks. I had been scared enough to finally ask for help, and he thought it was just stress? "Maybe," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "But Dr. Peterson will know for sure." 20 minutes later, a nurse called my name. David and I walked down the hallway to Dr. Peterson's office, and I felt my heart beating fast. Not from the chest pains this time, but from nervousness about what the doctor might tell me. Dr. Peterson was a kind man in his 50s who had been my family doctor for over 10 years. He knew my medical history, knew about the struggles I had faced as a single mother, and always treated me with respect and kindness. After I described my symptoms and showed him the notebook where I had been tracking my chest pains, Dr. Peterson listened to my heart with his stethoscope and took my blood pressure. His face was serious as he examined me. "Margaret," he said, "I think we need to run some tests to make sure everything is okay with your heart. These symptoms you're describing could be nothing serious, but they could also be signs of something that needs immediate attention." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of tests?" "I want to do an EKG right now, and then I want to send you to the hospital for some more detailed tests. We need to make sure you're not having any heart problems that could be dangerous." The hospital. The word scared me more than I wanted to admit. I reached over and grabbed David's hand, hoping for some comfort, some reassurance. But David pulled his hand away and looked at his watch. "How long is this going to take?" he asked Dr. Peterson. "I mean, if it's going to be all day, maybe I should reschedule and come back another time." Dr. Peterson looked surprised. "Well, these are tests to check your mother's heart. It could be a matter of hours, possibly longer if we need to run additional tests." I felt humiliated. Here I was, possibly facing something serious with my heart, and my son was worried about how long it would take. "David, honey," I said quietly, "if you need to go, I can manage by myself." No, he said quickly, probably realizing how his words had sounded. "I'll stay with you, Mom. Of course I'll stay with you." But I could see the frustration in his eyes. I could hear the reluctance in his voice. The son I had raised, the son I had given everything to, was staying with me out of obligation, not out of love. As we prepared to leave Dr. Peterson's office and head to the hospital for more tests, I had no idea that this was just the beginning of the most painful day of my life. I had no idea that within a few hours, I would discover just how little I meant to the son I had devoted my entire life to raising. The drive to Portland General Hospital was the longest 20 minutes of my life. David didn't say a word the entire way, just stared straight ahead at the traffic while his phone buzzed constantly with text messages. Every time it buzzed, I could see him getting more frustrated, more anxious to be somewhere else, anywhere else but in that car with his sick mother. When we pulled into the hospital parking lot, I tried to lighten the mood. "Well, at least it's a beautiful day," I said, looking up at the blue sky. "Spring is finally here in Portland." David just grunted as he parked the car. He was already pulling out his phone before he even turned off the engine. David, I said gently, could you maybe put your phone away while we're inside? I'm really nervous about these tests, and it would help me so much to have your full attention. He looked at me like I had asked him to give up breathing. Mom, I can't just ignore my phone. I have work responsibilities. Jennifer might need me. I have a life outside of this hospital visit. A life outside of this hospital visit. That's how he saw this day that was so important to me, so scary for me. Just a hospital visit that was interrupting his real life. We walked through the automatic doors of Portland General Hospital, and I felt overwhelmed by the sounds and smells and bustling activity. Nurses in scrubs hurried past us. Patients in wheelchairs were being pushed down long hallways. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something else I couldn't identify made my stomach feel queasy. The registration process took almost an hour. We sat in hard plastic chairs while I filled out form after form, answering questions about my medical history, my insurance, my emergency contacts. The whole time, David sat next to me typing on his phone, completely absorbed in whatever was happening on that small screen. David, I whispered, I don't understand this form about my insurance. Could you help me for just a minute? He glanced over at the form with obvious irritation. Mom, just put down whatever insurance you have. It's not complicated. But it was complicated to me. I had never been good with paperwork and forms. When David was younger, he used to help me with things like this. He used to be patient with me when I didn't understand something. Now he acted like helping his own mother was a burden too heavy to bear. A woman about my age sitting across from us smiled at me kindly. Honey, she said, is this your first time having heart tests? Yes, I said, grateful that someone was talking to me like a human being. I'm pretty nervous about it. Oh, don't worry, she said. The doctors and nurses here are wonderful. They'll take good care of you. Is this your son? I looked over at David, who was still staring at his phone screen. Yes, this is David. The woman smiled at David, but he didn't even notice she was looking at him. She looked back at me with a slightly confused expression, probably wondering why a son would be so detached from his mother at such a scary time. Finally, a nurse called my name. Margaret Thompson. I stood up, and David reluctantly put his phone in his pocket and followed me. The nurse, whose name tag said Linda, was a pleasant woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile. Mrs. Thompson, we're going to start with an EKG and then move on to some other tests, Linda said as she led us down a long hallway. The whole process might take several hours, depending on what we find. Several hours. I saw David's jaw tighten when he heard those words. The EKG room was small and cold. Linda helped me onto the examination table and began attaching wires to my chest. The cold metal electrodes made me shiver, and I felt very vulnerable lying there in that thin hospital gown with all those wires connected to my body. David, could you hold my hand? I asked. This is making me feel a little scared. David stepped closer to the examination table, but instead of taking my hand, he pulled out his phone again and started reading messages. Linda noticed. Sir, she said politely, we need you to put away your phone during the test. The signal can interfere with our equipment. David sighed heavily and shoved his phone back in his pocket like he was being asked to make some huge sacrifice. The EKG took about 15 minutes. When it was finished, Linda helped me sit up and said, Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Rodriguez wants to see these results and then talk to you about the next steps. We went back to the waiting area, and I hoped that maybe now David would sit with me and we could talk while we waited for the doctor. But as soon as we sat down, his phone came out again. Honey, I said softly, while we're waiting, could we maybe talk about something? It's been so long since we've had time to just be together and catch up. David looked up from his phone with that same impatient expression. Mom, what do you want to talk about? I wanted to talk about everything. I wanted to ask him about his job, about his marriage, about his dreams for the future. I wanted to tell him about the book I was reading, about the neighbor's new baby, about the garden I was planning for spring. I wanted to have the kind of conversation we used to have when he was younger, when he actually seemed to enjoy spending time with me. "Well," I said, trying to think of something that might interest him, "how are things going with Jennifer? You two seemed so happy at Christmas." "Jennifer's fine," he said, barely looking up from his phone screen. "And how's your job? Are you still enjoying the work at the accounting firm?" "It's fine." Every answer was short, dismissive, like he couldn't wait for me to stop talking so he could go back to whatever was so important on his phone. I tried a different approach. "Do you remember when you were little, and you broke your arm falling off your bicycle? We spent the whole day in the emergency room, and you were so scared. But I held your hand the entire time, and we played word games while we waited." For just a moment, David's face softened. "Yeah, I remember that. I sang you that song you loved, the one about the teddy bear, and it made you laugh even though your arm was hurting." "Teddy bear's picnic," David said quietly. "That's right. You made me sing it over and over until the doctor came to put your cast on." For a few seconds, we were connecting. For a few seconds, I saw a glimpse of my little boy, the child who used to need me, who used to find comfort in my presence. But then his phone buzzed, and just like that, the moment was gone. David was back to staring at his screen, and I was back to feeling invisible. If you're watching this story and you're thinking about someone in your family who might need your attention, someone who might be going through a difficult time, please don't wait. Please don't let them feel as alone as I felt that day. And if this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told, and your support helps me reach more people who might need to hear them. An hour passed. Then another hour. David was becoming more and more restless, checking his watch, sighing heavily, shifting in his chair like he was sitting on hot coals. Finally, Dr. Rodriguez appeared. He was a young man, probably around David's age, with a serious expression on his face. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I've reviewed your EKG results, and I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. I want to run some additional tests today. We need to do an echocardiogram and possibly a stress test." My heart started beating faster. "Is it serious?" "I can't say for certain until we complete all the tests," Dr. Rodriguez said. "But the EKG shows some irregularities that need further investigation." I felt scared and small and vulnerable sitting in that plastic chair. I reached out and touched David's arm. "Honey, did you hear what the doctor said?" David was looking at his watch again. "Yeah, Mom, I heard." Then he looked at Dr. Rodriguez. "How much longer is this going to take? I mean, what time do you think we'll be finished?" Dr. Rodriguez looked surprised by the question. "Well, sir, that depends on what we find. If everything looks good, maybe another 2 or 3 hours. If we find something concerning, it could be longer." 2 or 3 more hours, David said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "David," I said quietly, "if you need to go, I understand." But even as I said those words, I was praying that he would say no, that he would tell me there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be than right there with me. No, Mom, I'll stay," he said, but he didn't sound happy about it. They took me for the echocardiogram next. This time, David didn't even come to the testing room with me. He stayed in the waiting area, and when I looked back at him as the technician led me away, he was already on his phone again. The echocardiogram was more invasive than the EKG. I had to lie on my side while the technician moved a wand across my chest, pressing hard in some places, taking pictures of my heart from different angles. The room was dark, and I could see images of my heart beating on a computer screen. It looked small and fragile, this organ that had been working so hard for 67 years to keep me alive. "Is everything okay?" I asked the technician. "I can't interpret the results for you," she said kindly. "But Dr. Rodriguez will go over everything with you when we're finished." When I came back to the waiting area, David was pacing back and forth, talking quietly on his phone. I caught pieces of his conversation as I approached. "I don't know how much longer this is going to take," he was saying. "She's having all these tests done, and they keep finding more things to check." She. Not my mother. Not Mom. Just she. Like I was some stranger he barely knew. "Yeah, I know, he continued. "I'm missing everything today. Missing everything." What was he missing that was so important? What event or activity or obligation was more important than being with his mother while she found out whether or not something was wrong with her heart? He noticed me walking toward him and quickly ended his call. "How did it go, Mom?" "It was fine," I said, even though I was feeling more scared by the minute. The technician said Dr. Rodriguez will explain the results to us. We sat down again, and I tried one more time to connect with my son. "David, I want you to know how much it means to me that you're here today. I know you have other things you could be doing, but having you here makes me feel so much less scared." David nodded, but he was already looking at his phone again. That's when I heard him make the phone call that broke my heart into a million pieces. His phone rang, and he answered it without even thinking about whether he should take the call right there in the hospital waiting room. "Hey, Mike," he said, and I recognized the name. Mike was one of David's best friends from college, someone David spent a lot of time with playing poker and watching sports. "Yeah, man, I'm still at the hospital with my mom," David said, and then he lowered his voice like he didn't want me to hear what he was about to say next. But I heard every word. "Dude, I know, but she's doing that thing where she makes everything sound more dramatic than it really is," he said. "You know how she gets." How she gets. I had never made anything sound more dramatic than it was. I had spent my entire life downplaying my own needs, hiding my own pain, making sure I never burdened my son with my problems. "I'm going to try to get out of here as soon as I can," David continued. "Is the game still on for tonight? Because I really don't want to miss it." The game. While I was sitting there terrified that something might be seriously wrong with my heart, while I was facing the possibility of surgery or medication or a complete change in my life, my son was worried about missing a poker game with his friends. "Yeah, tell everyone I'll definitely be there," he said. "This can't go on much longer. This. My health scare, my fear, my need for support for my only child. All of it was just this, to him. Just an inconvenience that was keeping him from something more important." He hung up the phone and looked at me with what I'm sure he thought was a reassuring smile. "That was just Mike checking in," he said. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how he could be so cold, so selfish, so completely different from the loving boy I had raised. But instead I just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey." 20 minutes later, Dr. Rodriguez came back with a nurse I hadn't met before. Both of them looked serious, and I felt my stomach drop before the doctor even started speaking. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Rodriguez said, sitting down in the chair across from us, "I've reviewed all of your test results, and I'm afraid I have some concerning news." The room seemed to spin around me. I reached out instinctively for David's hand, but he was checking his phone again and didn't notice. "Your echocardiogram shows significant abnormalities in your heart function," the doctor continued. "You have what we call severe mitral valve regurgitation. Your heart isn't pumping blood effectively, which explains the chest pain and shortness of breath you've been experiencing." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "What does that mean? Is it serious?" "It is serious, Mrs. Thompson. Without treatment, this condition will continue to get worse. You're going to need surgery to repair or replace the valve." Surgery. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had never had surgery before, never been seriously sick, never faced anything like this. "When?" I managed to ask. "As soon as possible. I want to admit you to the hospital tonight and schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning." Tonight. Tomorrow morning? I looked at David, expecting to see concern, fear, the kind of reaction a loving son would have when his mother is told she needs emergency heart surgery. Instead, I saw him checking his watch again. "Excuse me, doctor," David said. But does she really need to stay in the hospital tonight? Couldn't she go home and come back in the morning for the surgery? Dr. Rodriguez looked at David with barely concealed disbelief. Sir, your mother has a serious heart condition. She needs to be monitored tonight to make sure she doesn't have any complications before the surgery. Right, of course, David said quickly. I just thought maybe. He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking about his poker game. He was thinking about how inconvenient it would be to have to stay at the hospital all night with his sick mother. The second major twist in my story happened right there in that moment, when I realized that my son was more worried about missing a card game than he was about the fact that his mother needed emergency heart surgery. But I still had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The nurse led me to room 314 on the cardiac unit of Portland General Hospital. It was a small room with 2 beds, but I was grateful to see that I would be alone for the night. The walls were painted a soft blue color, probably meant to be calming, but nothing could calm the storm of fear and anxiety that was raging in my chest. David helped carry my small overnight bag that I had hastily packed at home. Well, I say he helped, but really he just carried it while walking 3 steps ahead of me and checking his phone every few seconds. When we got to my room, he set the bag down on the chair by the window and immediately walked over to look outside. Nice view, he said, but he wasn't really looking at the view. He was looking at his watch again. The evening nurse, whose name was Patricia, was a woman about my age with gray hair and gentle hands. She helped me get settled in the bed and explained what would happen over the next few hours. They would monitor my heart rhythm all night. They would check my blood pressure every 2 hours. Someone would come to draw blood at 6 in the morning. The surgery was scheduled for 8:30. Do you have any questions about tomorrow's procedure, Mrs. Thompson? Patricia asked. I had so many questions I didn't know where to start. What exactly would the surgeon do to my heart? How long would the operation take? What were the risks? What would recovery be like? How long would I be in the hospital? But when I opened my mouth to ask these questions, I looked over at David, who was standing by the window tapping his foot impatiently, and I lost my nerve. I guess I'll ask the surgeon tomorrow, I said quietly. Patricia must have sensed my nervousness because she sat down in the chair next to my bed and spoke to me in a gentle voice. Mrs. Thompson, heart valve surgery is very common these days. Dr. Williams is one of the best cardiac surgeons in Oregon. You're going to be in excellent hands. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. This stranger was showing me more kindness and reassurance than my own son had shown me all day. Patricia turned to David. Are you planning to stay with your mother tonight? David looked up from his phone like he had been asked to donate a kidney. Stay here? In the hospital. Many family members choose to spend the night before a surgery, Patricia explained. We can bring you a comfortable chair that reclines, and you're welcome to stay as long as you like. I held my breath waiting for David's answer. Part of me desperately wanted him to say yes, to tell me that of course he would stay with me on the night before my surgery. Part of me already knew what he was going to say. Well, David stammered. I mean, my mom will be sleeping most of the night anyway, right? And she'll be in good hands with all of you taking care of her. Patricia nodded politely, but I could see the slight frown on her face. Of course. Whatever works best for your family. David walked over to my bed and leaned down to give me a quick kiss on the forehead. I'll be back first thing in the morning, Mom. Try to get some rest, okay? Okay, honey, I said, forcing a smile. I love you. Love you too, he said, but he was already heading toward the door. I'll see you tomorrow. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in that hospital room with nothing but my fear and my broken heart for company. Patricia lingered for a few minutes after David left, adjusting my blankets and making sure I had water within reach. Mrs. Thompson, she said gently, is there anyone else you'd like us to call? Any other family members or friends who might want to know about your surgery? The question made me realize how small my world had become. David was my only child. His father had been my only sibling to die young. My parents had been gone for years. I had a few neighbors I was friendly with, but no one I felt close enough to call about something this personal. No, I said quietly. It's just David and me. Patricia squeezed my hand. Well, then, you just focus on resting tonight. We'll take good care of you. After Patricia left, I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about my life. How had I gotten to this point? How had I ended up so alone, facing the scariest moment of my life with no one who really cared about what happened to me? I thought about all the years I had devoted to raising David. I remembered the nights I stayed up with him when he had fever. I remembered working 2 jobs so he could have the clothes and school supplies he needed. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated from high school, from college, when he got his first real job, when he got married. I had lived my entire adult life for my son, and now, when I needed him most, he was somewhere else playing cards with his friends. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope. Maybe it was David calling to check on me, to tell me he had changed his mind about staying the night, to tell me he loved me and was thinking about me. But it wasn't David. It was Jennifer, his wife. "Hi, Margaret," Jennifer said, and her voice sounded strange. "David told me about your surgery tomorrow. I just wanted to call and wish you well." "That's so sweet of you, Jennifer," I said. "Thank you for thinking of me." There was a pause, and then Jennifer said something that confused me. "Margaret, I hope you know that David really does care about you. He's not very good at showing it sometimes." Why was she telling me this? What had David said to her about today? "Of course I know David cares about me," I said. "He's been with me all day." Another pause. "Right," Jennifer said. "Well, anyway, I just wanted you to know that we're thinking about you." After Jennifer hung up, I lay there wondering about that strange conversation. Why did she feel the need to tell me that David cared about me? What had he said to her when he got home? I found out the answer to that question 2 hours later, in the most painful way possible. At 11 o'clock, I was still awake, too nervous and scared to sleep, when I heard voices in the hallway outside my room. The cardiac unit was usually quiet at night, so I could hear the conversation clearly. It was 2 nurses talking as they walked past my door. "Did you see that woman in 314? One of them said. "The one having valve surgery tomorrow?" "Yeah, what about her?" "Her son was here earlier. Nice-looking young man, but I felt so sorry for her." "Why?" "Well, after he left, I ran into him at the elevator. He was on his phone with someone, and I heard him say that his mother is always making mountains out of molehills. He said she's done this kind of thing before, making everyone think she's sicker than she really is." My blood turned to ice. "Really?" the other nurse said. She seemed genuinely scared to me. That's what I thought too. But he told whoever he was talking to that she's always been dramatic about her health, and that the doctors probably found something minor and are making it sound worse than it is. I felt like I was going to be sick. David had told someone, probably one of his friends, that I was being dramatic, that I was making mountains out of molehills, that the doctors were exaggerating my condition. But the nurses weren't finished. "The worst part," the first nurse continued, "is that he said he felt guilty about leaving her alone tonight, but that he had important plans he couldn't change, and she would be fine without him." Important plans he couldn't change. A poker game with his friends was more important than staying with his mother the night before heart surgery. "That's awful," the second nurse said. "She seems like such a sweet lady. I can't imagine leaving my mother alone in a situation like that." Their voices faded as they moved down the hallway, but the damage was done. I lay there in that hospital bed, shaking with hurt and humiliation and a kind of pain I had never felt before. My son, the boy I had devoted my life to raising, the man I had sacrificed everything for, thought I was a liar. He thought I was being dramatic. He thought the doctors were exaggerating. He thought my fear was fake, my pain was fake, my need for his support was fake. But even worse than that, he had shared these thoughts with other people. He had told his friends that his mother was a drama queen who made up health problems for attention. He had portrayed me as some kind of hypochondriac who couldn't be trusted to tell the truth about her own body. I cried that night like I hadn't cried since my husband died. I cried for the mother I had been, who had given everything and received so little in return. I cried for the son I thought I had raised, who apparently didn't exist. I cried for the loneliness that surrounded me like a thick, suffocating blanket. But the third and most devastating twist in my story was still to come. At 6 a.m, a technician came to draw blood for my pre-surgery tests. I had barely slept, and I felt weak and exhausted. The technician was a young woman about David's age, and she was kind and gentle as she prepared my arm for the needle. "Big day today," she said with a smile. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted. "That's completely normal," she said. "But Dr. Williams is amazing. My own grandmother had the same surgery 2 years ago, and she's doing great now." As she was drawing my blood, she made conversation to keep me distracted. "Is your family here with you today?" "My son will be here soon," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "That's good. Family support makes such a difference." After she left, I tried calling David's cell phone to make sure he was coming. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Still voicemail. By 7:30, I was starting to panic. The surgery was scheduled for 8:30, and David was nowhere to be found. Patricia came in to check on me and prepare me for surgery. "How are you feeling this morning, Mrs. Thompson?" "I'm worried about my son," I said. "He said he'd be here by now, but I can't reach him on his phone." Patricia looked concerned. "I'm sure he's on his way. Sometimes people oversleep when they're stressed about a loved one's surgery." But I knew David hadn't overslept. I knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. At 8 o'clock, Dr. Williams came to see me before the surgery. He was a tall, distinguished man with gray hair and kind eyes. He explained the procedure in detail, answered all the questions I had been too afraid to ask the night before, and assured me that while the surgery was serious, he expected excellent results. "Do you have any other questions, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked. "Doctor," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if I don't wake up?" Dr. Williams sat down in the chair next to my bed. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your fear. This is major surgery, and there are always risks. But I want you to know that I've performed this operation hundreds of times, and the success rate is very high." "But what if?" I couldn't finish the question. "What if something happens to you?" he said gently. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you wake up from this surgery and go on to live many more healthy years." Just then, there was a commotion outside my room. I heard David's voice, loud and agitated, talking to someone in the hallway. "What do you mean she's already going into surgery?" he was saying. "I thought it wasn't until 9 o'clock. Patricia's voice responded calmly. "Sir, the surgery was always scheduled for 8:30. We tried calling you several times this morning, but your phone went straight to voicemail." David burst into my room, looking disheveled and panicked. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and he smelled like he had been drinking. "Mom," he said, rushing to my bedside. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I overslept. My phone died, and I didn't hear the alarm." But I knew he was lying. I could see it in his eyes, smell it on his breath. David hadn't overslept. David had been out all night playing poker and drinking with his friends, and he had completely forgotten about his mother's surgery until someone called to ask where he was. Dr. Williams looked uncomfortable with the disruption. "Sir, we really need to get your mother to the operating room now. If you'd like to say goodbye, you have about 2 minutes." David grabbed my hand, but his touch felt cold and foreign. "Mom, everything's going to be fine. I'll be right here when you wake up, okay?" I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son clearly. I saw the selfishness, the indifference, the complete lack of genuine care for my well-being. I saw a man who would rather spend the night drinking and gambling with his friends than be present for his mother's life-threatening surgery. "Okay, honey," I said quietly. "I'll see you when I wake up." But as they wheeled me toward the operating room, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided that when I woke up from this surgery, things were going to be different between David and me. I had spent 67 years putting everyone else's needs before my own. I had spent 25 years making excuses for my son's behavior, convincing myself that he was just busy, just distracted, just going through a difficult time. But lying on that gurney, being wheeled toward an operating room to have my heart literally opened up and repaired, I finally understood the truth. My son didn't love me the way I loved him. My son didn't value me the way I had always valued him. My son saw me as an inconvenience, a burden, a source of drama in his otherwise perfect life. The devastating discovery wasn't just that David was selfish and ungrateful. The devastating discovery was that I had wasted my entire adult life loving someone who was incapable of loving me back. As the anesthesia began to take effect, my last conscious thought was a promise to myself. When I woke up from this surgery, I was going to find a way to live for me. I was going to find a way to matter to someone, even if that someone was just myself. I had given my son everything, and he had given me nothing in return. But I wasn't dead yet, and maybe it wasn't too late to find a different way to live. I woke up in the recovery room 6 hours later, and the first thing I felt wasn't pain from the surgery. It was disappointment. I had hoped that maybe, during those hours when I was unconscious, I would somehow forget what I had learned about my son. I had hoped that when I opened my eyes, I would go back to being the mother who made excuses for David, who believed he was just busy, who convinced herself that deep down he really loved me. But the truth was still there, sitting on my chest like a weight heavier than any heart condition. My son had spent the night before my surgery playing poker with his friends. My son had told people I was a drama queen who exaggerated my health problems. My son had shown up drunk and disheveled to what could have been the last conversation we ever had. The recovery nurse, a gentleman named Carlos, checked my vital signs and asked how I was feeling. "The surgery went perfectly, Mrs. Thompson," he said with a smile. "Dr. Williams said your new valve is working beautifully." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat still sore from the breathing tube. "Your son has been asking about you every hour," Carlos said. "He's been very worried. Would you like me to let him know you're awake?" Very worried. The words almost made me laugh, if I had been capable of laughing at that moment. David worried about missing his poker game, worried about having to spend time in a hospital, worried about how my health problems inconvenienced his life. But worried about me. About my well-being, my recovery, my feelings? I didn't think so. "Not yet," I said to Carlos. "I need a few more minutes." Those few minutes turned into an hour. I lay there in the recovery room, listening to the beeping machines and thinking about my life. For 67 years, I had defined myself by how well I took care of other people. First my parents, then my husband, then David. I had never asked myself what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy. When I was finally moved to a regular room, I was surprised to see that it was different from the one I had stayed in the night before. This room had a window that looked out over a small garden, and there was a comfortable chair where visitors could sit. Patricia came to check on me, and I was so glad to see her familiar face. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked, adjusting my blankets. "Tired," I said. "But better than I expected." "That's wonderful. Your son is in the waiting area. He's been here since you went into surgery. Should I bring him in?" "Since I went into surgery." "Not since before I went into surgery, which is when he should have been there. Since I went into surgery, which is when he finally bothered to show up after his night of drinking and gambling." "Patricia," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. In all your years as a nurse, have you seen many families deal with serious illness?" Patricia sat down in the visitor's chair. "Oh yes, honey. I've seen it all." "What makes the difference?" What makes some families come together and some families fall apart? Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking about her answer. You know, Margaret, I think it comes down to whether people are capable of putting someone else's needs before their own. Some people rise to the occasion when someone they love is sick. They show up, they sacrifice, they prove that love is more than just words. She paused, and I could tell she was thinking about my situation specifically. And some people, she continued gently, just can't do it. They're too focused on their own lives, their own problems, their own wants. It doesn't mean they're evil people. It just means they're not capable of the kind of love that shows up when things get hard. I knew she was talking about David, and I appreciated her kindness in not saying it directly. Thank you, I said. That helps me understand some things. Would you like me to bring your son in now? I took a deep breath. Yes, I think I'm ready. David came into the room looking better than he had that morning. He had obviously gone home and showered and changed clothes. He was carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop, and he looked genuinely relieved to see me awake and alert. Mom, he said, rushing to my bedside. Thank God you're okay. I was so scared. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, and I could smell his aftershave, the same brand he had worn since college. For just a moment, I remembered the little boy who used to climb into my bed when he had nightmares, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them beautiful flowers. How are you feeling? He asked, sitting down in the visitor's chair. Do you need anything? Are you in pain? I'm okay, David, I said quietly. The doctor said the surgery went perfectly, he said. He said you're going to be better than new. That's what I hear. David seemed nervous, like he could sense that something was different about me, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Mom, he said, I want to apologize for being late this morning. I know you were probably worried when I didn't show up on time. Here was my chance. Here was my opportunity to fall back into the old pattern of making excuses for him, of pretending I believed his lies, of protecting him from the consequences of his own selfish behavior. David, I said, where were you last night? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, after you left here yesterday evening, where did you go? What did you do? David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I went home. I tried to get some sleep before coming back here this morning. Did you go to Mike's poker game? The color drained from David's face. What? No, Mom, of course not. I wouldn't go play cards when you were in the hospital having surgery. But I could see the lie in his eyes. I could hear it in his voice. After 67 years of life, 47 years of motherhood, and 25 years of making excuses for this man, I had finally learned to recognize the truth. David, I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. He nodded, still looking uncomfortable. Last night, after you left, I heard two nurses talking in the hallway. They said they had seen you at the elevator, talking on your phone. They said you told whoever you were talking to that I always make mountains out of molehills, that I've done this kind of thing before, and that the doctors were probably making my condition sound worse than it really is. David's mouth fell open. Mom, I never said. They also said you told that person that you felt guilty about leaving me alone, but that you had important plans you couldn't change. Mom, I can explain. Then this morning, you showed up 45 minutes late, smelling like alcohol, with your hair messy and your clothes wrinkled, telling me you had overslept and your phone had died. David sat there in silence, probably trying to figure out what story he could tell that would make this all go away. David, I said, I spent the night before my heart surgery alone and terrified, while you were playing poker with your friends. I went into that operating room this morning not knowing if I would wake up, while you were sleeping off a hangover. Mom, it wasn't like that. What was it like, David? Please, help me understand. Help me understand how the son I raised, the son I sacrificed everything for, could care so little about my health, my fear, my need for support. David stood up and began pacing around the small room. Mom, You don't understand. I've been under a lot of stress lately. Work has been crazy, Jennifer and I are having some problems, and I just needed one night to blow off steam. One night to blow off steam. The night before his mother's heart surgery. David, I said, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you got pneumonia? He stopped pacing and looked at me. Yeah, I remember. Do you remember how scared you were? How you couldn't breathe and you thought you were going to die? Yeah. Do you remember how I stayed with you in the hospital for 5 days straight? How I slept in that uncomfortable chair next to your bed? How I held your hand every time you had a coughing fit? David's face softened slightly. Yeah, Mom, I remember. Do you remember how I sang to you when you couldn't sleep? How I read you stories when you were bored? How I made sure the nurses gave you the good Jell-O and not the green kind you hated? I remember. I didn't leave you alone for 1 minute, David. Not for 1 minute. Because that's what you do for someone you love when they're scared and sick. David sat back down in the chair and put his head in his hands. Mom, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I should have been here with you last night. David, I said gently, I don't think you do know. I don't think you understand what you've done, or why it matters so much. He looked up at me with confusion in his eyes. For 25 years, I continued, I have made excuses for you. When you forgot my birthday, I told myself you were busy. When you stopped coming for Sunday dinner, I told myself you needed time with your wife. When you never called just to see how I was doing, I told myself you were building your career. David started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I told myself that deep down, you were still the loving little boy who used to bring me dandelions and tell me I was the best mom in the world. I convinced myself that when things got serious, when I really needed you, you would be there for me. Tears were starting to form in my eyes, but I wasn't going to stop now. David, I needed you. For the first time in your adult life, I really, truly needed you. Not for money, not for help around the house, not for anything except to be present with me during the scariest experience of my life. Mom, I was here. No. David. You weren't here. Your body was here for a few hours yesterday, but you weren't present. You were thinking about your phone calls, your poker game, your friends, your convenience. You were everywhere except here with me. I took a shaky breath and continued. And last night, when I was lying in that bed terrified that I might die during surgery, you were laughing and drinking and playing cards like nothing important was happening. David was crying now, but I wasn't sure if the tears were from genuine remorse or just from being confronted with the truth about himself. Mom, what can I do? How can I make this right? That was the question I had been dreading, because I knew the answer was going to break both our hearts. David, I said, I don't think you can make this right. I think this is who you are, and I need to stop pretending you're someone different. What do you mean? I mean I need to stop waiting for you to become the son I thought I raised. I need to stop making excuses for behavior that has no excuse. I need to stop putting your needs first and start putting my own needs first. Before you judge me too harshly for what I said next, I want you to remember something. If you're watching this story, you probably have children or grandchildren of your own. You probably understand what it means to love someone so much that you would do anything for them. But I also want you to think about whether that love should be unconditional, even when it's destroying your own heart. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel if this story is touching you, because sometimes we need to hear these difficult truths about family and love and the limits of what we should accept from the people closest to us. David, I said, I want you to leave now. He looked shocked. What? Mom, I'm not leaving you here alone. You just had surgery. I've been alone for a long time, David. I just didn't realize it until now. Mom, please don't do this. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. Do you, David? Do you really love me? Or do you love the idea of having a mother who never asks for anything, who never complains, who always forgives you no matter what you do? He didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I want you to think about something, I said. I want you to imagine that Jennifer needed heart surgery tomorrow. Would you spend tonight playing poker with your friends? Of course not, he said immediately. Why not? Because she's my wife. Because I would want to be with her. And I'm your mother, David. The woman who raised you alone after your father died. The woman who worked 2 jobs so you could go to college. The woman who gave you everything I had to give. David stood up again, pacing and crying. Mom, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything, David. I want you to go home and think about the kind of person you've become. I want you to think about whether you're capable of loving someone other than yourself. And what about us? What about our relationship? That was the hardest question of all, because the answer was going to change everything. David, I said, I will always love you. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I can't keep pretending that you love me back in any way that matters. Mom, that's not fair. What's not fair, David, is that I spent 25 years waiting for you to show up for me, and when I needed you most, you chose a card game instead. I was exhausted, both physically from the surgery and emotionally from this conversation that was long overdue. I want you to leave now, I said quietly. I need time to heal, and I need time to figure out how to live the rest of my life for myself instead of for you. David stood there for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with whether to argue with me or accept what I was saying. Mom, he said finally, I'm going to go home and think about what you've said. But I'm not giving up on us. I'm not going to let you push me away. I'm not pushing you away, David. I'm just stopping the pretense that you were ever really here. After David left, I lay in that hospital bed and cried harder than I had ever cried in my life. I cried for the mother I had been, who had given everything and received so little in return. I cried for the son I thought I had raised, who turned out to be nothing more than a selfish stranger. I cried for all the years I had wasted waiting for love that was never going to come. But I also cried tears of relief. For the first time in my adult life, I had told the truth about my own needs. For the first time, I had refused to make excuses for someone else's inexcusable behavior. For the first time, I had chosen my own dignity over someone else's comfort. 3 days later, when I was discharged from the hospital, David was not there to pick me up. I took a taxi home to my empty house, and I was surprised to discover that I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. Over the next few weeks, David called several times. He wanted to apologize, to make amends, to go back to the way things used to be. But I wasn't interested in going back. I had spent too many years going back, forgiving, forgetting, pretending that things would be different next time. Instead, I started going forward. I joined a support group for people recovering from heart surgery. I made friends with other women my age who understood what it meant to put your own needs last for so many years that you forgot you had needs at all. I started volunteering at the hospital, helping other patients who didn't have family members to advocate for them. I discovered that there were many people like me, people who had given everything to their children only to find themselves alone when they needed support most. And slowly, carefully, I began to build a life that belonged to me. Not to David, not to anyone else's expectations or needs or convenience, but to me. 6 months after my surgery, David came to see me. He looked older, more serious, and when he hugged me, it felt different than it had before. Mom, he said, I've been thinking about everything you said in the hospital. You were right. I was selfish. I was a terrible son when you needed me most. Yes, I said simply. You were. He looked surprised that I didn't immediately rush to comfort him, to tell him it was okay, to make excuses for his behavior like I always had before. I want to try to be better, he said. I want to try to be the kind of son you deserve. David, I said, I hope you do become a better person. I hope you learn how to put other people's needs before your own sometimes. But I'm not going to wait around to see if it happens. What do you mean? I mean I'm living my life now. For me. If you want to be part of it, you're welcome, but only if you can show up in a real way. No more excuses, no more broken promises, no more treating me like I'm an inconvenience in your busy schedule. David nodded, and I could see that he was finally beginning to understand what he had lost. Can I take you to dinner sometime? He asked. Can we try to start over? We can't start over, David, I said. But maybe we can start from here, from the truth about who we both are. That was 2 years ago. David and I have dinner together once a month now. He's more present than he used to be, more attentive. He asks about my health, my friends, my volunteer work. He seems to genuinely care about my answers. But our relationship is different now. I don't live for his approval anymore. I don't make excuses for him when he disappoints me. I don't pretend that he's something he's not. And most importantly, I don't wait for him to give my life meaning. I've found meaning in friendships with people who show up when they say they will. I've found meaning in helping other people who are lonely and scared. I've found meaning in taking care of myself the way I spent so many years taking care of everyone else. If you're watching this story and you recognize yourself in it, I want you to know something. It's never too late to stop waiting for other people to love you the way you deserve to be loved. It's never too late to start living for yourself instead of living for people who take your love for granted. Love should not require you to disappear. Love should not require you to make excuses for cruelty. Love should not require you to accept behavior that breaks your heart over and over again. I learned that lesson in a hospital room at 67 years old, after major heart surgery, when my only child chose a poker game over being there for me in my time of greatest need. I learned it later than I wish I had, but I learned it nonetheless. And now, at 69, I can honestly say that I am happier than I have been in years. Not because my son finally learned how to love me properly, but because I finally learned how to love myself. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. These stories matter. These truths need to be told. And sometimes, the people who need to hear them most are the ones who have spent their whole lives taking care of everyone except themselves. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, it's never too late to choose your own dignity over someone else's convenience. It's never too late to stop accepting less love than you deserve.